Being gay is not a sin. The Bible has 6 verses that evangelicals say talk about homosexuality. They don't. Because you asked, I'm going to go verse by verse and explain. TikTok only gives us 10 minutes to do this. Luckily, it's not hard. So you might want to take notes, though, or just watch it again. And we start at the very beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 19. It's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Basic story is that there are 2 angels disguised as men. They show up to this town as outsiders. They need a place to stay. They're offered a place to stay by a guy named Lot. And while they are there, the men of the town come and bang on the doors and say and demand that Lot gives these strangers, these out-of-town people, that Lot pushes them outside so that they can rape them and have sex with them. It's not about homosexuality, clearly, but you might think it's about rape, which, I mean, I think probably, obviously, it kind of is. But if you look at the book of Ezekiel, it actually says what the sin of this story is. The sin was not being hospitable. Hospitality in the ancient Near Eastern world was the highest value of all, and the idea of people in the town not being hospitable to outsiders, travelers, man, that was a huge deal. Also, they wanted to rape them. So, I mean, it's just not about homosexuality. On to Leviticus, which is a problematic book in general because it says all kinds of things are a sin, like tattoos, eating steak with blood in it, rare steak, or cutting your hair, and none of those things are sin. You actually have to do a lot of work to understand how to apply Leviticus to the modern world. You want to pay attention to this one because this one repeats itself, but the word that's used here in Leviticus is a word in Hebrew called mishakabe. That Hebrew has a lot of ways to talk about sex, kind of like we have a lot of ways to talk about precipitation. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but like rain, drizzle, sleet, snow, like mist, all of that. They have a number of different ways to talk about sex. This word talking about sex, it really is talking about sexual promiscuity, sex without commitment. It has this idea of this sense of roaming about it. And so this is sex without commitment, sex without that. And so promiscuity or, sleeping around, that's what this is talking about. It's not talking about sex with men. Oh, hey, I forgot to say that right here, it's also the potential that it's talking about like sex acts in worship. There's some debate over that, but that's another thing that it could be talking about here. Oh, but isn't there another verse in Leviticus? Yes, chapter 20. Good news. Remember how I told you to remember that one? It's the same as the last one. But the other thing to think about is, why is this only men and men? Where are the women and women? Where are all the other things? And that is because the ancient world viewed sex and sexuality completely different than we do. And we're going to talk about that next. And that's all the Old Testament verses. We're going to go now to the New Testament, to the book of Romans. If you notice, we're skipping all the things that Jesus said because he didn't talk about this. He did talk a lot about religious hatred and push back against religious haters, but religious haters don't like to talk about those verses. Anywho, the book of Romans, chapter 1, starting in verse 18, it uses this idea of people giving up natural relations for unnatural ones. That's the sort of metaphor it uses, and it highlights the fundamental difference in the way we understand sex and sexuality in the modern world versus the ancient world. In the modern world, we have this idea of orientation that you might fall in love with, go partner with, and be sort of lifelong partners with somebody who is the same gender as you. You might fall in love with people. You might be attracted to people. That is not how the ancient world understood it. For more on that, look at my earlier video on LGBTQ stuff and how my seminary taught me to be affirming. And what I'm saying here is, if you put it in the modern sense, it would be straight people having sex that is not straight sex, right? It's the idea of your natural orientation, heterosexual, homosexual, whatever, and violating that natural orientation. Next up, 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10. There's another ancient word you're going to want to know. It's called malakoi. Malakoi, it's a rare word, actually. It's kind of hard to translate because we don't see it a lot in Koine Greek. But ultimately, it is talking about unbridled lust. Again, promiscuity, sleeping around, but even more extreme. I think maybe a modern term that we hear is the term sex addict, that this is probably a lot closer to that idea. That's the word that's used here. 1 Timothy chapter 1. There's another ancient word you're going to want to know. It's called arsenokoitai. There's a couple of words used here. There's the malakoi. There's arsenokoitai. I think I'm saying that right. Somebody tag Dan McClellan and tell him to correct me on that. But arsenokoitai, it's something that is talking about a practice with adults and children. There was one practice in the ancient Greek world where it was called pederasty, and it was men and boys, but that's what it was talking about. And in fact, that word was translated into like before English translations, and for a long time it was translated as pederasty or as pedophilia, as something like that in all these other languages, and that term, it's really fascinating. You should look at the 1946 initiative documentary. But the idea of like homosexuality like being added to the Bible in the 1940s, this is one of the key places that happens. There's other places too. You can look it up, and it's really fascinating. But this is one to really center on when you think about that. Either way, it's non-consensual. Think about rape, that kind of idea. That's what's being talked about here, not homosexuality. See, I told you it wasn't hard. Take a deep breath, because we made it here with time to spare, with time for two honorable mentions. The book of Genesis, chapter 1 and 2, God creating humanity. I can't tell you the number of times when I was growing up I heard Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. No. God creating man and woman. The argument even to talk about that is to say, like, the purpose of them was to be able to have babies, and two males, two females cannot have babies. This is true. But that logic means that absolutely no sexual expression outside of that which can produce a baby. So once a woman goes through menopause, like, you just go through all the versions of straight sex that does not result in a baby, cannot result in a baby. It's all the devil. So you've got to just leave Genesis 1 and 2 alone. And then you may never hear it, but there is a passage in Jude that sometimes comes up, but it's talking about rape, so just ignore it. Can I give you two recommendations? One, if you grew up in evangelicalism, or if you're trying to help an evangelical person come out of this sort of hateful understanding of the Bible, I would like to recommend a book called Holy Love. It's my favorite one to give because it was an evangelical seminary professor that changed his idea through study and tries to help other people come out of that world and that understanding. He talks their language. It is really, really great. And if you're just looking for online stuff, you can Google Amy Jo Levine and clobber, because these 6 passages are often known as the clobber passages, because of the way Christians try to clobber gay people with them. But her article is brilliant, so I recommend it highly.